Welcome to the first series of the Queer As podcast, where we're yarning with queer Indigenous artists and creative practitioners about their work across the public imaginary. I'm Sandy O'Sullivan. I'm a Wiradjuri trans non-binary artist and a professor in the Centre for Critical Indigenous Studies on the Wallumattagal campus at Macquarie University on unceded Darug Noura.
And I'm Han Reardon-Smith, a settler, trans non-binary musicer, radio maker and academic. I've been working with Prof Sandy at the Centre for Critical Indigenous Studies over the past 4 years, while living on unceded Jagera, Yagara-Yugarapul and Turrbal country.
Today we're catching up with the incredible Jawoyn artist Troy-Anthony Baylis.
Hi, my name's Troy-Anthony Baylis. I'm of mixed descent and I'm of a Jawoyn ancestry, which is where Catherine is in the Northern Territory, and I'm based here in Adelaide on Kaurna country. I've been a practising artist for 32 years, so I guess what's important to consider, it certainly with kind of what I have to say, is that context of time. So you have to kind of imagine yourself that, you know, the different aspects of what I'm talking about, it sort of spans over time and time changes and social, cultural time shifts within a 32-year period. So some of, I guess, what will come out of this is saying, you know, some of the earlier interactions that are probably and experiences that have shaped my now, yeah, they're really from a different time. But of course, you know, we all of us kind of have to at some days kind of reflect on that sort of time. So yeah, sort of consider that through the way. I also worked in other areas in addition to being an artist. I at one stage I was the Executive Officer for Reconciliation in South Australia. So I have that's a good part of my background. I've also been a lecturer and a research fellow within universities, particularly the University of South Australia. My very first job, besides, you know, washing windows and things like that as a kid and paper runs, I also worked when I was 20 as a teacher at Morningside TAFE, teaching a course of Aboriginal printmaking.
Amazing.
Right back when I was, all those years ago.
Yeah, that building's
and
now at like theatre space. Yeah. Yeah.
And also worked in politics, in industrial relations. I've been chair of some community associations, and I've also worked on some other boards as well, and sometimes outside of my industry, because it's a way to kind of bring things together and to keep finding ways to, I guess, bring people together, but also, you know, learn different things from different walks of life.
Absolutely. Yeah. You're talking so much about all of the kind of meeting points of the different facets of creative artistic life. And a big part of the Saving Lives project is looking beyond just the kind of like individual art making practice of queer Indigenous artists. So not so much just sort of self-expression, but into broader community participation. So, I mean, you've already spoken to this quite a lot, but we're wondering, what does community mean to you as an artist and as a queer Jawoyn person?
Yeah, I think community is a really interesting idea. I guess community for me, I'll start at the individual first, I guess, at this idea where individuality and community kind of cross over and meet. And I'm going to use the term representation, because obviously in our communities, you know, we often, and we need to, see different versions that are like ourselves. You know, we've been hearing that for a while now, and that's where a lot of progress has been made in recent times specifically. But, you know, at the end of the day, I do think, you know, the best way to represent anything is to be yourself, and to sharpen that a little bit more, to be your best self. And so I think when it comes to that, even that idea of representation, I will get onto community, I promise, is, that idea that we kind of, it's a double-edged sword. So we seek for representations, I guess, you know, of ourselves. Yeah, and maybe sometimes we get excited, sometimes agitated, because we don't quite see the ideal version of ourselves of what we want to see. And it chips away at our ego, and we kind of, you know, want to clap back and really, you know, feel a kind of way about it. And I think that's really understandable, but I think that's kind of the reason why, is because we're trying to kind of, a part of us wants to see ourselves, and when we don't quite see it, we can feel a kind of way, and it's not great. And I think we kind of need to let that go. So community for me is is all of those things, but it's really about the diversity of community. And diversity, I guess if we think about it a bit deeply, we realise that it's already there anyway. I mean, everyone has a, unique experiences, and all these things that make them. And I think sometimes if we can think of community in that way, that it's about differences, but there's some linkages that connect us, is a really, at least for me, I find it's a really healthy way to be. Yeah, and that enables me to celebrate other people, really wholeheartedly, without this desire for them to kind of represent me. So, yeah, I find it's kind of an outlook. It's finding this sort of balance. So, yeah, for me, community is really about the diversity of everybody and their experiences, and at least trying to celebrate and be comfortable with that. That also, for me, helps me deal with the things that I find really uncomfortable to hear, or even things that I guess in some ways I either probably don't like or approve of. But I just have had to kind of realise, no, that's okay. They're where they're at. And challenging is okay, but it's how you challenge people, because I feel that if I challenge people really, really hard, well, they're entitled to be themselves, and they're on a journey too. And if relationships are about how you make people feel, if I'm going to make somebody feel awful, that's not going to lead to a dialogue. That's not going to lead to a happiness or a relationship. So we sort of cut off the moment, that you make people feel. Feelings aren't always fact, I say, but the way you make people feel, I think, is really important. That's relationships 101, including community.
It really is. And I mean, there's a lot of talk about being in good relations with one another, but it often is also used to compel people rather than to form those relationships. I think that's really powerful. And of course, that work about self is also about community, because we belong in community, And
I have this saying that I say to myself sometimes, and it's a bit of a joke. Look, I use humour and that edge of things to kind of to navigate, all worlds as well. And so I have this thing as like, in terms of, uniqueness and individuality, it's a couple of things. So one, it's like, well, you're all alone, but you're absolutely not alone. 8 billion people on the planet. It's okay. And secondly, there's this idea of the artist as being some selfish sort of person, and the creative just really being about trying to express themselves, trying to make sense of their world, or to deal with their therapy. And to, or to be, a big star that wants to shine brighter than everybody else, or thinks they're self-important, all of those kind of negative ideas of the self. But I also think in that individuality and that idea that, well, there's other people like you, it's okay. Again, 8 billion people in the world, just do you, and it's relatable. So let that stuff go. It took me a long time to let that stuff go. It's really only kind of recently, and I know it's in some ways, not everybody goes down that kind of way of thinking. And also, for some people that kind of doesn't really matter. It's not a concern. Or in some people it's just a maturity thing. But, hey, I guess that's why we have these discussions, is because sometimes if we can learn things from people a little bit sooner, it enables us longer to live our best selves.
And it is one of those things to some extent about maturity that I've observed, at least. I shouldn't be casting it on others, but, it is that idea that you kind of learn that you're not the most important person in the room, but you are the most important person for you, because you're the only one that's got control over yourself. And I think it's being in good relations with people, to know yourself and know what you can bring. Yeah,
and it is okay. I can see obviously we're all smiley now, but it's also okay to have bad days, and to allow other people to have bad days. Getting that idea that you can't expect anybody to be, as we're not ourselves, 100% of the time, 100% fabulous at all times. Even that illusion that we think, someone's just got this perfect life, they're amazing, or they're cashed up, or they've got a good job, or they're gym fit, body fit, all of that sort of stuff. I realised a while ago too that those people don't always feel amazing about themselves either. I mean, I think for me, I always thought, I'm not a very attractive person. I don't need any comment on that. But so I thought, okay, I've got an interesting brain. I'm going to keep working on that. No one can take that away from me. So I kind of used that as a driver, even using the insecurities as a driver. And I think a lot of, whatever successful means, but I think a lot of queer and Indigenous people do that. I think that's what keeps us going. It's okay to have a bit of an ego and even a bit of a bruised ego and feel a bit insecure, because it's what you do with those emotions that count.
I think you're asked to uniquely draw in on yourself as well in that role, and that's not something that everyone has to do as a part of their work, right?
No, and it's also not easy, because some of those unique experiences that I know, or we know, that a lot of us have, but that stuff's just not stuff we talk about all the time. And sometimes that's for good reason. I mean, obviously, I think a great thing about creative people is I think all of us let out aspects of our vulnerability at our own pace when we're ready to do so. And those vulnerabilities are really relatable, and they're much more relatable than what we think, because they're not, centre all the time. We don't, always catch up and say, hey, let's talk about our trauma. Let's talk about the horrible things that happened to us. Obviously, there's moments when we do that, but there's differences and nuances in those experiences too. And to some degree, there's aspects of community and culture that aren't quite ready for some of those things yet, but we're getting there. I think it takes a village, people. And really, in many ways, I believe, we're all here because there are people over the years that will stick a little bit of their beak out, just a little bit, and it's just enough to go, yep, I could do this too. Because we also know when people go right out there, then they're so vulnerable and it destroys them. I mean, we've seen that. So it's sort of choosing your moments, trying not to be too aggressive, trying to be mindful about how that makes people feel. Also not coming across as, I'm the victim. People are uncomfortable with that too. But, I think through art and creativity and all sorts of creativity, whether that's speaking, writing, making cinema, visual arts, dance, all of these things enable us to, they're entwined with stories, and it allows us to just have that voice in terms of community, just that little bit more.
I was just going to say, one of the really powerful things about engaging with your work over the years has been how much it's really helped me as an artist, but also as someone who's really challenged these ideas that Aboriginal artists can only do certain work. And I've been able to, I'm not always pointing to it to others, but I'm always remembering it. And I frequently am pointing to it, but I'm also it feels like solidarity.
I think everything I make, even though I know for some people, and thank you for that, that's really deeply heartwarming and validating. I think now I've lost my train of thought. I got caught in the emotion about being validated.
I think part of it is, this whole idea that all of your work is Aboriginal work, or it's your work as an Aboriginal person. And I think there's this kind of weirdness that happened around the time that I was starting to see a lot of your work that was really resistant to that and was trying to push us back into very narrowed ways of considering Indigenous art. And there was a lot of interest internationally in very particular forms of Indigenous, more broadly imagined art, and that everything that was pushing outside of that had to have a particular narrative in order for it to be allowed, permitted. And what I loved about your work is that it didn't always do that. It was always, the kind of jokiness around stuff, but also the way that it both engaged and challenged ideas of how Indigenous artists can make. I'm not talking about Indigenous.
Yeah, I think what happened with me is I got to a point, even though, I can look at early work and think, it was always there. But there was a point when it's like, I've realised, I found that slipstream. I'm just going to call it that. I found the slipstream. And that slipstream was right in that intersection, here am I using a street term, right in that intersection of, and an academic term, right in that intersection of this ridiculous idea, but this idea that a polar opposite of authenticity and Aboriginality and queerness are like, you know, at logheads. It's like, no, well, obviously we're both of these things at the same time, all at once, you know. And I think I managed to find this area where I'm just pushing that nose out a little bit, and I could do that slightly through what would be seen as just slightly cheeky, and those of us that know can see it, and I think that's why you saw it, because it's just slightly on that pushing edge without being outrageous for the sake of it. Yet it was sort of naughty.
And I wasn't just seeing it because I was an artist making work that was doing some of this. I was seeing it because I was a person who was witnessing this and was an audience for your work. And, you know, I think there's also this kind of idea that, oh, people have insights because they're thinking deeply. People have insights on the meaning of this because they're the audience who
the power of the image, isn't it? And I guess, and in some ways, you as an artist that uses imagery, that's my main ingredients for my crafting. It's about, you know, combining these things and having, and I'll use particular imagery that allows people to have already a way in.
Yeah,
so it still has an accessible.
Yeah.
It is relatable, but it's also something quite else. And then if your brain is wired that way or experienced in certain ways, or you read the room sheet or something, you can then find other layers. That idea of having this sort of these, I guess, just use this sort of, it's often overused, but that term transformative moments. I had another one of those kind of realizations, again, when I was in the 90s, and this was at a time when so it sounds weird to say in the main in terms of Aboriginal art and culture, because, you know, when we're in the main, you know, but there was certainly this period which, again, feelings aren't always facts, but it certainly felt like the idea of being an Aboriginal artist meant being on the country in which you are from and making work from that place. So there's a few things that your centred place is on country, and that you're making on country, and that the authenticity comes from making on country. And what happened with me, I was at a fireworks gallery in the 90s, sort of mid-90s, and Emily Kame Nangwarre was in the gallery painting. And just then in that moment, I was, wow. I mean, it seems ridiculous to say. Even today it seems ridiculous to say. But again, this idea, if you step back in time, how it was at that time, that feeling of, you know, to be authentic meant this. And now he was seeing, you know, Emily Kame Nangwarre, who is, you know, arguably one of the most celebrated artists in the world. And she was painting about country, not being on country. So something that simple was, for me, a revolution.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's pretty powerful. That's a pretty powerful one, actually. I don't know that I'd ever regarded that in certainly the whole.
I felt that pressure looking at my law.
And also, I think there were two things that were happening at the time in the 90s. I think there was the idea that you could be a part of very bold resistance, and that was mainstream. It certainly wasn't about queerness. You know, it was actually quite the opposite, really. In a lot of ways, it was a doubling down on ideas of belonging, but also resisting a whole lot of complexity of identity. It really was doing that, so that we were seeing, and this is not a reflection of people who were doing resistant art. I think it was what the rest of the population could understand about Aboriginal art. So I think you got people doing resistance and you've got people doing work on country, as though for a start they're separate things, but also as,
and of course they're both resistant in a way.
Exactly.
And I suppose, you know, I consider all of my work, you know, I suppose resistance in a few ways, but for me it's always about the tension. It's that tension about like, oh, am I meant to be laughing here? Or, oh, is this artist just making fun of our culture? No, I'm not. And if I am, I'm making fun of kind of everything as a way in. I'm making fun of the horrible monsters and the negative tropes, and I'm just kind of finding ways to own it. I see all of those readings, all of the good, bad, and the downright ugly as being part of our cultural inheritance, certainly part of mine. I know, horses for courses. Horses for courses sounds like, oh, I'm hungry, I'm going to eat a horse. But, it's a weird term.
Yeah, totally.
I find that all of those things are useful. And I think for a lot of us, when we... Look, I think a lot of us have maybe, this sort of, sounding like I've got all these personalities, but this a little voice that sort of sometimes says, oh, you're not good enough, or you're an imposter about this, you're not talented, you're not beautiful, you're too fat, too thin, too gay, too Aboriginal, Yeah, that's like this sort of saboteur that's always as big as you are. And this relates to the good, bad and the ugly because, obviously the saboteur is this ugly thing, which is still sort of part of us. I know it's an imagination. For some people, they are, well, I can see, I can hear you. You're there. You just stay there. You stay there. For me, and I guess it's important for me because this is an individual thing. It's sounding a bit psychological now. But for me, I'm like, oh, you've got all of this power to nearly destroy me. So it sounds kind of dangerous. But for me, I've worked out a way to just little scratch at that little saboteur and think, oh, you've got all this energy. I'm going to squeeze you and love you, really love you, and draw from your energy because that's part of me too. So I guess for me that's part of my kind of slipstream and dealing with these sort of oppositional things and keeping that tension in play. It does sound very self-sadomasochistic. I'm thinking of a Clinton Nain work now, that fantastic White King bleach work with this sort of asphyxiation, which is, that is an inspirational work for me. I love the tension in that and it's pretty harsh. But it's that work is right on the money for me. I think that's one of the most, in my mind and my how I view the world, one of the most successful pieces in my field is that particular work.
Yeah, it's an incredible work. I think I'm thinking quite a bit of the sort of settler tendency to gauge the authenticity of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander artworks and art practices through occupying this kind of positionality of an absolute other, of being kind of placed on a pedestal as something that is completely separate from our culture. And I think there's so many ways that your work challenges and disrupts that through the kind of weaving together of popular cultural references. And you were sort of saying before about like having these kind of inroads for folks, but like various kind of iconography, geography, and kind of craft practices that are widely accessible, like knitting that a lot of people engage in.
Which has history in our Aboriginal ancestors too.
Exactly,
The top end of Australia. I know it's these wigs, it's pretty warm up there. But, have relatives that were, ancestors that were, knitting jumpers for the troops.
Yeah,
Yeah, so,
absolutely.
Knitting has an interesting history. And knitting, so now you've got me excited about knitting.
No, textile crafts is such an interesting part of your work.
Knitting, and I'm going to. So, the thing with knitting too, even the way that it as a gendered practice, that's not necessarily secure either. That's chopped and changed over hundreds of years since we can trace knitting. So this idea of, women's domestic work, that was several periods, but that's not necessarily its beginnings or its intents, its functionality. These ideas that get changed over a few generations, this happens in all different cultures. And, when I was formally researching one of the questions about the existence of queerness in Aboriginality and Indigeneity within the Australian region is, look, there are aspects of so-called evidence, but at the same time, we have to totally understand that just because we don't necessarily have language for that or really clear, easy structures to follow, there was a lot of incursions along that way. So not only colonial incursions, but even before that, there may have been that, cultures go through cycles. that, some things about what are okay shifts and changes. It only takes a couple of generations for that to happen. We see that in our own lifetime. In less than a generation, you can have changes. So, of course, there's going to be changes over time. So I just got to the point thinking, well, yep, history, great. Of course, we can draw from our imaginings from history and realities of history. But at the end of the day, well, we're here. Just get used to it, and enjoy it. I no longer allow that kind of these questions that are only answerable by a really complex answer that nobody got time for that, is just do it, be yourself. I mean, we're here. I mean, and in every other ethnicity, plants, animals, other things that aren't people, there's queerness everywhere. So, always was, always, I'm going to be a bit naughty to it, always has been.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's right, though. The idea that we've just arrived is its own nonsense, but also it's part of, when you think about native title and the way that it has been extinguished when we've been forcibly removed from places, the colonial project requires us to prove always in order for, and so I think we've drunk the Kool-Aid on some of this and kind of bought into some of this idea. But certainly it's been imposed on us even when we haven't.
There's a wonderful irony and connection to the visual arts there that I'd love to voice here, but I don't really think it's out there too much anyway, is that even that idea of, say, the Mabo decision and native title, in a way, in part, that was won as evidence of painting, of art. And at the same time, some of their stories of our country being removed from us because of art as well. So I think, John Glover in particular, and which I love his work, by the way. I find it interesting. It's not all like horrendous, but it also is, even that idea that Glover would befriend Aboriginal people to get access to country, would paint country, and then that painting could be used as evidence to say, look, it's fertile land, so now we'll have the land. This is also in European art too. Yeah. Some of the very aristocratic commissioned art in Europe. You have the window in the back of the painting of a view of a house of property. That's not actually the reality of the view out the window. That's a claiming of an asset.
Yeah.
So it's such a wonderful revelation that after all of that, particularly with the Glover and the other examples, is to then have works of Aboriginal art then being able to be used in a legal situation to say, look, we've got an enduring culture and connection to this country. Here's the evidence. In a sense, the Statement from the Heart was kind of a version of that as well.
Yeah,
as a visual.
Yeah, I think
painting of that.
I think this concept of the not just visual connection but the making connection, like making through this tangible process, a connection that is beyond the individuals that live now and the land that exists now, is a really powerful part of it. And of course, that's been used against us as well in photographic record or record more broadly. Yes. So the idea of when it can be used and subvert their narrative in that context is I think really powerful. Yeah.
And I think sometimes subverting their narrative, and I do it with some of my work, I will include, not specifically with photographs, although with some early second settlement painting, which, colonial painting, but I call it second settlement painting, is, there's a series of my work called Making Camp, and there's imagery of me in drag with my pink poles, which are representing queer bodies, absent queer bodies, deceased queer bodies. In that, I'm both this juncture as I'm sort of both celebrating the painting in a way, making camp there, so not erasing it, but being like a ghost presence.
And it's responding to it too, because...
Yeah, so it keeps both alive. That's the tension, keeping them both there.
Yeah. Oh, interesting.
Yeah, like Yuki Kihara's various works in response to Paul Gaukin's work as well does a similar thing more recently to your Making Camp works.
Yeah,
in
I think
that
Ree
kind of
does
reimagining.
that in a way.
Yeah.
With that video triptych work. I've just forgotten what it's called. But that work, I'm sure it'll probably come up. It's another key work I find. I think some Darren Seavy's works kind of do that to a degree as well, although on country, actually on someone else's country, but still it's on country with iconic things. It's almost like a photographic. It's a landscape anyway, put it that way. But yeah, I think Rees particularly does that with visual art in a similar way to what I have with that particular series of Making Camp, which is only 4 works for me. There's 4 little simple tiny works, and I moved on to something else because I've too many things I want to, not too many, a lot of different things I want to express. So I quickly moved on. It's there, it's planted, it's taking up real estate. Next.
We've talked a little bit about some of the kind of structural challenges and difficulties of the colony in general, and some of the ways that Aboriginal art has been used and abused by colonial powers. But I'm also interested to hear a bit about some of the kind of structural challenges within the visual and performance art worlds, and maybe your thoughts on some of the barriers or walls that need breaking down in some of these spaces, especially
this stuff's
for queer
really
Indigenous
hard.
creatives.
It's really hard. So I guess, we've seen collectivism. Collectivism, yeah, I think that's the right context for that. Yeah, we've seen that being successful, say with, Bumali proper now. I'm sure there's some other partnerships, collectives too. So I'm apologies to miss people out, That's the version of not being 100% of the time. Please forgive me. Look, it's complicated, and I think, but that's what we're here to do, is talk about the complications. So I think, the structures that we have, obviously, for organisations, it's boards, it's having senior positions or even junior positions within organisations. In a sense, it's working with very alive remnant of structures that were dragged from the United Kingdom and a default for culture here, such as law and structures. And I know, of course, they've changed. We've got our own versions in different states, but, essentially that's what it is. And there is that dilemma about being at the table. And, of course, not all of us are able to be at the table. And when we are at the table, we also have to know that there's a conflict of interest too, and we have to manage those. And it's complicated. And we know that sometimes you have families or people who are related, or people who have a loyalty, even if it's not to each other, and it's not always disclosed. And, so this can happen. This happens everywhere, by the way, not just in boards and committees of black fellas or people from same cultures. I mean, it happens everywhere. But of course, when something goes wrong, I don't think we quite know how to deal with that yet. I think it's very complicated. And there's a reason for it. And one is because obviously we're being disadvantaged, affected in every way, shape or form for the longest time. So it's understandable at least it's understandable that for some people they want to make the most of it if they get that opportunity. So I get the compromise there. But, yeah, I think that those structures are really difficult, but ultimately there's that idea, even, we've all been to university, to organisations that in a sense have already prescribed and inscribed our knowledge or we have to seek permission, in a sense, to be regarded as excellent about what we are and what we're doing by other people who often don't have much experience at all compared to what we're actually researching.
And also what's demanded of particularly Indigenous artists.
But I figure in a lot of cases, if you're not at the table, so the table doesn't have to be on the board, but if you're not participating, it's not going to work out well. So there's a certain position where you just have to think, okay, I'm going to participate the best I can here. And so that's a challenge alone, because that also sometimes comes with it of, oh, we're not good enough, or these pre-ideas, well, they're just going to wash all over me, or they're going to treat me like the token. And those perceptions, although they're based in realities, they're also not entirely real either. I mean, they often are, but not always. So, it's very difficult. These are very difficult spaces to enter. But I do feel that we have to keep at it and keep doing it. And the more that we're seeing successes come from this, the more easily it will seem that we can do these things. And I know that there's been times where there's been quotas and things like this, and sometimes it doesn't feel nice to be a quota. It doesn't feel nice to be, this priority area. And sometimes that language doesn't feel nice for other people, because some other people would be like, well, okay, so I'm not a priority. Well, stuff my life then. Look, I'm probably an overthinker and an oversharer.
Oh, no, that's good.
but I think in this instance it is good, and I'm glad.
It is good.
I'm not embarrassed about it anymore.
No,
I think it's a great asset, and I don't mind if I come across like a lunatic. I'm it's.
But I think it's being
but it doesn't feel good. Yeah, it doesn't feel good to have that feeling like someone's been forced to include you. Right?
No, that's right. But also we're on both sides of that. We're often the ones who are arguing for the inclusion, and then, that might not be the same people, but, and we know anyone who's arguing for inclusion is also fully aware, I would think.
Yes.
Of how that feels. And it does lead to a kind of re-evaluation of who you are on the fly, what you're making, what you're doing, and, what people's motivations are.
Yeah, I think it gets back into it's similar, like I suppose with all these, especially works of art, but everything's there are facts, but there's also a lot of what we do, how we present, what we think. They're interpretive and subjective.
Of course.
Like the work of art.
Yep.
And there's their own rules associated with it. So even that idea about getting on boards or associated associations is that we have that, or we would used to call them community organisations. And in a way they are, in terms of some of their exemptions, some of their purpose. Mm-mm. But of course the liabilities that come with these things is because, of course, they're also legal structures, and you have responsibilities. So so if we're going to be on, board, sometimes it ain't always a happy ride. There might be an issue, and that issue is private. You have to keep it to yourself.
Yeah.
And we're up at this idea, especially with the communities that we come from, is we want to know what's going on. And it's hard because it's actually no one else's business what's going on, because when you're on a board particularly, you have a legal responsibility for the welfare of those people in your employ, or in and how the rest of the community feels about it, unfortunately you can't respond to.
Yeah. And yet we've also got responsibilities to the rest of the community. So
exactly.
this I don't think it's very well articulated, and not just across arts, but across all areas. I don't think this is very well understood, and I think...
Well, that's why it's a good opportunity for us to speak now, and I've, as I disclosed, I've been, the chair of a couple of community associations, and also been on other boards as well. So I like the experience. And of course I've had times where thinking, he just wants to do that so he can take over. It's like, no, it was hard at the time, but of course it wasn't all cocktail parties and invites to concerts. It was community work, it was hard work, and part of the hardness of it is that you had to keep things to yourself, and you had to really obey by the law and be responsible.
Yeah, I think that is something that the complexity of the networks and the system, particularly because it has been top down for us, is not really understood in the art area. There's a lot for not artists. I think there's a lot of idea that somehow it's freedom, and it doesn't involve any of that, or it's a resistance to that. I mean, a resistance to it is still an acknowledgement of it, but it exists. It's been part of the way that resistances have worked. It's been part of the process, and it doesn't matter what aspect of life Aboriginal people have been a part of over the last couple of 100 years. We've been subject to this. And, no matter how we resist it, there's still aspects of this that force particular engagements. And there are resistances to that too. But resisting from outside of the system is a different thing again. Just is. You were talking about the couple of groups like Proper Now and Mali, and I think what we're seeing and have always seen, including from some of the members of both of those, is resistances that happen within smaller groups as well, and within individual practice, and within these spaces that are about not necessarily coming to agreement with a group of people, but being of the moment and responding in that moment. And that's just a lot harder to do in a formal system. It
is. And look, and some people can do that as well. It's as though they get to a point, and maybe this is about being popular or not popular. I know this stuff's a dilemma too, and I ain't implicating anyone in particular here because, I know, love, respect, understand. I feel I've got an understanding to a lot of different walks of life. That's ridiculous. To a lot of perspectives. I've really worked at it. Maybe that's because I, in some weird way, of naturally have to deal with all of that anyway. But sometimes I guess this is a dilemma with artists and some creatives that is that we getting a voice, we get an audience, and sometimes we'll do things provocative. I mean, often, my stuff is provocative in its own way. I don't think it's a massive I don't think they're loud, but they are provoking. But some of us, and that's diversity, will have more support, might have more support even financially through the work we do and all of these things, that I sometimes feel like, oh, well, that's okay for you to say that or to stir something up in this kind of way, but you're not having to deal with the consequences. And that's a difficult one because those stir-up points are really valuable, but I think sometimes the weight of really buzzing something up when people don't have anywhere to go with it, sometimes, at least for those people at that time, doesn't mean there's a learning afterwards, but the devastation's too great. Sometimes. I know that's a really deep thing to think about, but I do try and consider that with how I communicate. And obviously, there's a great place for loud, powerful work because it moves people, but it sometimes brings casualties along the way. And I always get concerned about the casualties.
I think it's probably led some internal resistances that many queer Aboriginal artists have had to talking about queerness as well. And there's plenty of artists who sometimes queerness or talking about queerness is part of what they do and other times it's absolutely not. We understand that this can happen. People can have it as a focus, have it as really present, and at other times it's not a part of the landscape of the work or the focus of the work, or they're thinking about a different audience. But I think there also have been casualties for artists who have had that very specific focus. And I think that
certainly recently.
Yeah, that's right. But I think it's also been easier for some of those artists to have an inroad, and it's not to do with the artists, to do with the art making. I'm not even sure it's always to do with Aboriginal community. I think it's maybe the narrowing of the lens of how others see Aboriginal art or Indigenous art.
Yeah, and hey, that's, I guess at one stage I talked about having, work having access points, and I'm not at all suggesting that what you're saying is people have one note, but sometimes there are notations. There are notes that are really loud and clear and really resonate with people.
Yeah.
And sometimes these really simple things are super complex. I mean, what we're talking about, they're obviously complex. We're trying to find the language to pin it down. They're difficult. But I suppose with someone like my work, for example, it's so nuanced and it's so many things. It could almost be seen, I mean, we know it's not, but it could have been seen as, I don't think that person really quite has a grip on what they're doing, because there's not a note that penetrates really loud through. I mean, there are a couple, if I look for them, I'm realising over time there are, but it's a lot of different songs.
Yeah.
Oh, totally. And this is sort of this is one of the issues that I think comes up quite often in talking about queer Indigenous representation and art making, is that there's a bit of an expectation for pick a lane, kind of like stay in the box sort of thing, like knitting. the categorization, like wanting to keep people contained into these neat, knowable spaces without having that kind of room for complexity. You know, it's like refusing to be that singular no, because you can't be, because you're actual just individual beingness, which is really the case for everybody, but, you know, just does not fit with the categories that have been set out by, you know, the colonial, hetero-patriarchal, white supremacist nation-state establishment. And so, you know, when you're kind of like checkboxing things, you don't sit comfortably in that intersection, say, but rather you're a kind of nodal point in which there's a whole lot of associations, maybe. Thinking about that kind of complexity, you've spoken previously about this idea of creative permaculture, of like including all parts of the self, of noting that kind of pests and parasites can make everything stronger and a part of a vital ecosystem. So, maybe I wonder if you could talk a bit more about how that shows up in your practice.
Permaculture is a good one. Like at one stage I was really into the idea, I could do an entire thesis just on this, you know, because permaculture is a few different ways, because perm comes from hair as well, and you know, and it's, you know, curly hair, straight hair. It's Prince reference there if you know Prince pop life. Yeah, so there's that angle, and particularly, you know, the power of hair. And I know that obviously that kind of has Afro-American associations, a strong association. I think it's, you know, it derives from. But also, permaculture is that idea in gardening is that it's all of these things, and obviously even with permaculture, it's not like just let everything grow wild. Well, that's an unfortunate term. It's not having, you know, everything in there. You're still arranging things. You're still weeding things out, so to speak. But sometimes it accepts those weeds as part of the ecology of the other thing, because sometimes the weed might enable another plant to survive better. It might create more shelter from the wind.
Totally. Or like my parents live on a small farm southwest of Toowoomba on Guyabal and Jawoyn country, and after the really bad droughts in 2018, 2019, when there were first rains in 2020, the first thing to grow back was chickweed all across as ground cover, or chickweed and pigweed, I think, were the two that, and you know, they look like a weed as well, but both it's quite nutritious, and it's a very good, like, it brings nitrogen back to the soil, so it enables other plants to then grow. So it's sort of like having the patience for that process to take place before you get rid of that and replace with other plants.
So I guess I use that as a methodology to some degree, but I also in a way kind of use that, use sounds like it's a one-way street. Utilize that as even just a way of finding a peace, a middle ground with all of these oppositions all the time, oppositional things, and we have that within us, all of us, you know, constantly. You know, it might be an environmentalist, but we're living in a dwelling made of toxic materials, or or we've got, you know, inexpensive clothes, but they're made, you know, not in the best conditions. You know, so we just do our best. We try to. So even that is a dilemma. So, you know, it's a way of navigating and being okay with these oppositions that are going on. It's a sort of a pathway. You know, it would be that.
I love that. I love the way that you, in this landscape of talking about how to manage space, but also, as you've always talked about your work, and as we've talked about it a bit recently, very few artists are constantly curating their past collection, but I think in your mind you really are. And we've found it really lovely, because of course we are with your work. We're considering the breadth of your work, and I know that, you know, this is something that you're thinking about a lot more at the moment, but also, you know, that recalling, that was part of the Saving Lives project, was to say, let's not forget all of this remarkable work that's happened. Let's save it in its own way.
Okay, well, here's some insight from what you're talking about that relates directly. So I have to say, some of my earlier work, and I look at now and I think, okay, it's very much doing it in its own way, doing the same thing as what I'm doing now. It's just a bit more, maybe a bit more mature, a bit more sophisticated, a bit more, it knows what it is, would be the way to put it now. But there are aspects of the earlier a lot of the earlier works, and even things that were slightly uncomfortable, that are still sometimes uncomfortable now, I planted the seed in those works. Even some of the materials, which aren't, that really that outrageous, but even the materials that with my younger self, I've thought, look, I haven't quite nailed the poetry of this material. It's like buttons, for example. So there's buttons into my earlier works, but I just felt compelled to just put these buttons in there. I knew that there was a language to come, but I also knew somehow instinctively at the time, it's okay. Maybe they're just sort of decorative. They're just, just buttons. But you've got to have more than one word to create a language. So now, going back 32 years of being an artist, I can now look to some of these, and now I've made some recent works there's thousands of buttons on them, and that they have a very defined language. But it's enabled me to now be able to draw then works that have buttons on them from my earlier parts of my life, to bring them forth, and now they can be read in context with these works, and then these meanings that were there all along, but it wasn't the right time to air them, not very loudly anyway. Now I can air them loudly and proudly with a glimpse into a time that was 30 years ago. I mean, yeah, so that's a curated aspect of my own practice. I see all of my work in many ways as being a bit curatorial, particularly when it comes to say, popular culture, or just cultural in general. So there's that idea, and I've also have a curated history as well. And from time to time, I like to curate things in a similar way to if someone's putting a book together. For me, the works of art are like the chapters. Yeah, so the curatorialness of my practice, I feel that, say, if I'm referencing a moment from the past, knowing full well that it sometimes doesn't even take a generation for something to be lost, and then if no one else is bringing it forward, well, then it is gone.
Yeah.
So I'm consciously bringing things forward, certain things, things I'm not. But that also includes sometimes things that are uncomfortable and not at all nice. Say Anita Bryant, for example.
Yeah.
It's like, because I don't want to be silencing that.
And there's a generation
I really know for some people.
Yeah, there's a generation of people that don't know it, as well. So
but there's also people that are older than us, or our age, certainly older than us, who are around who had that experience of Anita Bryant, and understandably they're like, I just don't want that in my life. No,
I think I might be more than 10 years older than you, so I might be one of those people.
Okay.
But at the same time, everybody experienced these things differently too, and so bringing it back into the now is remarkable. In that
growing up in northern New South Wales and Queensland, all over Queensland. This is Joe Bjelke-Petersen period. So having on the news saying that people like me, and I was, a child at the time, were possessed by some sort of demon, that we were going to do the most wretched things to your children, that we were going to recruit them, and having some of our parents partly thinking, oh dear, well, we do have a monster here, and those Anita Bryant works were a way for me to deal with that. So even though Anita Bryant was American, that language, those ideas transferred. Of
course it did.
Into Australia. They didn't so much here in South Australia where I'm living now.
Oh, is that right? I grew up in Queensland too. So so my experience was exactly yours, and that's that it was a doubling down that was.
And it also enabled me to forgive people and attitudes.
Yeah.
All over our community, not only with my own family, but other people as well, thinking, well, no wonder they thought these things. It enabled me forgiveness because that was their socialising agent. One of their primary socialising agents was the TV and watching, neighbours hurl abuse at each other over their fences and these stupid debates, and having us told we were these horrible monsters, and that's to give younger people seeing or reading this a bit of context, is that, you can imagine growing up as a young person being told we're these horrible monsters. And this stuff sticks, and we know, going back to this, saboteur idea I talked about earlier, is that these things stick with you for life. Yes. And for me, it's about how you manage that. Luckily for me, I have outlets to be able to get it out and express it in a really kind of often a slow way, but sometimes a very quick way, but always through art or artistic things like writing.
And to share it with others. I mean, for them to be able to hear that when they may not have heard it before, I think is really powerful. And I mean, the cyclical stuff of this is, unfortunately, this is the experience of a lot of young people today, again.
Yeah. Well, this whole Trump thing, right? Well, it's not just Trump, but I mean, certainly with, Trump and Rowling, which is very unfortunate because I have to say, ironically, the Hermione Granger character, I wouldn't say I'm a bloke, but, I'm male identified and, Hermione was a young woman identified. I saw part of myself I think lots of
Hermione
people Granger.
did. Yeah, I think lots of younger people did, and I think that's the really tragic thing about that. It becomes more tragic than just Trump being, terrible and transphobic. But, the power of people being able to see that this happened before and that there was a way through it is actually something that's powerful. And what was the way through it? It was some of the lampooning, some of the calling out that your work does, and this...
Anita Bryant was pied on television. I mean, incredible. And even though I wouldn't condone that sort of, I guess it's television. But, even though I don't condone violence, that was a pretty
it was pretty powerful.
Act. Pretty physical act. Yeah. But Anita Bryant, horrendous, although, on the weirds, I wouldn't even say upside, she was certainly very clever at the same time and very quick. I mean, straight away she goes, oh, well, at least it was a fruit pie. So she knew how to throw serious shade real quickly. I mean, she had the skills.
But she believed in herself too. That's the thing. She believed in, the nastiness.
And it was reinforced by quite a dominant culture at the time.
And how lovely that her granddaughter married a woman in her lifetime.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thanks, Nana.
But, I mean, that's the cycle too, is calling that and recalling it. And for younger people who haven't heard about Bryant, for instance, understanding that that is a context. Because I think, sometimes for younger people, including myself, 50 years ago or whatever, I did think we're the first ones going through this. We're the only ones and we've heard about certain events over time. You hear about Stonewall, or you hear about what happened during the HIV/AIDS crisis of the 80s. But they're moments that you hear bits of. And, a lot of things get lost in that. And so work that recalls things but also is in the now is, I think, just one of...
I think one of the things that puts Anita Bryant specifically in the now, I know earlier on we had, the Cold War stuff, which particularly with homosexual men, it was quite a horrific time.
Yep.
But I think with Anita Bryant, where it went, one of the reasons why it's really relevant now, that the sayings are the same, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But it's that use of mass media all at once. And she was the breakthrough moment. I'm using that as an opposite thing. So I think that's funny because I'm used to hearing breakthrough moments in a really positive way. But that was the breakthrough moment.
It was, and it's different than now where you have multiple different ways that people get information. There weren't multiple different ways. There was a couple of channels on the TV.
But she utilised them.
Yeah.
Really loudly. I mean, she knew how to work a camera and she was quick. Yeah, I had Richard Perham open my Anita Bryant Monuments exhibition. And, of course, he is a 78er.
Yeah.
And the way he opened it was fantastic. He came in with, all of his piercings showing through his outfit. He doesn't always dress like that. And he did this thing rather deliberately. Just to say to these people, look, I can do this because of, I guess it's a form of resistance. But and another really clever thing is he got these photographs of our queer ancestors who died in Auschwitz, pictures of them, and threw them onto the floor, and it was this sort of visceral thing. But it was powerful and performative. It was lovely at the same time. But he was able to just give us this glimpse into the queer community, at least. And again, that's a term that was used against us quite deliberately. And
look, so was gay.
Yes.
So was gay. So was lesbian. Sorry, they're just as problematic
and
to
musical.
As queer were.
Musical.
Yeah, totally.
Yes, I'm musical. Thank you. very.
We're all a little musical.
Yes, yes. And look, and I even like that idea that some of our codes, if you like, are wrapped up in joy, whether it be music and musicals and, stuff that might seem, airy and fairy and rainbows and unicorns and all of that. And I know for some people that feels like we're taking up all the oxygen in the room. Make it stop. It's all too much. And in a way, in one reading, it sort of suggests that, we're just these simple, airy, fairy, rainbowy sort of people. But that idea of having that joy or these symbols of joy, in many instances, and absolutely I think in reality, is they're a kind of a compensation.
Of course they are.
For the horrendousness that we've been through.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, I wanted to use this as an opportunity to get that out, because I don't think I think for some people that idea of these rainbows, they're so bright and so almost nothing or just carefree, that the fact is they come from a place of absolute caring.
Oh, they really
because we need it.
And also of the equal opposite. A lot of what Han and I write about is against the insistences on trans joy and queer joy, the insistences by others. But we deserve it. There's a difference between insisting that that's all we are and us deserving it. And the deserving it comes from its equal opposite, this idea that Bryant, talked about, that we didn't deserve it. That actually we were doing these horrendous things and we didn't have a place in the world, and this is an insistence on a place in the world. So, yeah, absolutely, all the things, the things.
I'm actually crying now underneath these it's classes, but it's joy as well as it's that sweet spot. It's not crying because I'm upset at the world. I'm crying.
But
about
joy
things.
is such an important thing, such an important kind of survival strategy. It's about building community capacity to continue as well. So it can seem over the top to people that don't require that in order to have their survival protected. Yeah,
and it's also good
because
to share
their
that with our
survival is
community, because
protected.
not all of our
It's
community realises that either.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just about partying. It's about being able to have continued survival and
being happy to be in the world.
Yeah.
It's about that. But you're dead right, Han. It's about, for people who think it's over the top, it's because they don't have to have that. They just have it in there every day. And, it's quite different when it's something that is not guaranteed. And I think as Aboriginal people, we understand that, joy and a sense of belonging for many of us is not guaranteed.
And we're not taking something away from other people either.
Of course not. Yeah.
There's so many things to look at all the time, and maybe even more stuff now more quickly. So, if you don't want to look, just look away.
Yeah.
You don't need to have this, cultural surveillance around other people like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's totally unnecessary. How does that affect your life? Really? Let it be. I've got to get all Beatles and Yoko Ono. They did some powerful work, and as a queer Aboriginal person that's never been to Liverpool or New York, I adore. I have been to Tokyo though, and I have been to the United Kingdom, but just not those two places specifically. Yeah, John and Yoko. War is over if you want it. I often use that little if you want it about different things too. Just little nods to art history and inspiration from anywhere, that idea you can be a queer person that likes Kylie Minogue as well as Ain Stutz and Denoi Barton.
Yeah. But you can also suffer from that, and some of what we want is to have people not have to suffer, but also people do make those choices to love all the things and have all the joy. And even though there's those bad actors that you talk about, and they are bad actors, like somebody who's saying stop your joy to another human being is someone who is overstepping. But from their perspective, they're maintaining cohesiveness or something. And
it's a policing of,
Yeah, and I guess we bring that mirror back in again about that idea about people wanting to see. So it's not only people within our, we have to realise, we know, this sounds, again, patronising, it's wrong words, this idea of people seeing themselves in other people.
Yeah.
Maybe in a way, a lot of those people that seem to be kind of opposed, and I'm sure not all of them, sometimes, at least I have to hope anyway, at least it gives me hope, is that maybe there's an aspect about what they see in me and they don't like it. It's because they see a similarity in me in the first place.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's threatening to their sense of self that's built on being in alignment with the category that they've been placed in by the society.
Exactly.
And that's threatening to be like, well, maybe that's actually not the truth of who I am. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just want them to know I celebrate them by being myself.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or also they can just fuck off.
Exactly.
Calming, Sandy.
Jane County, love her. you know the reference, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I won't say it because it's more crude, rude, maybe not tattooed.
I wonder if you can just speak about work that you feel like is yet to do for you, for others. And I guess I'm thinking about what that might mean for queer Indigenous people. I don't want to say kids because I think it's any ages. People are inspired or thinking about their worlds, and art often gives them ways to kind of move through that. And we know that. We know that because we know that your work does that for people because you came through very strongly in the surveys that we ran. But also we know it because it affects us in that way. Not more than other people, there's no competition. But why specifically your work is because the tangents that it got me thinking about, but also the way that people talked about the breadth of your work as though you only work in one field, but it was actually like one of the areas, and then another person would say a different area, is a part of that as well. I think so, yeah.
Yeah. So I think in terms of future, I know there's an interesting irony in my work is that, I think, I'm going to use a terrible term again, representation, about, an artist represents, well, at the very least, their own lifetime. It's of their own generation. But generations are expansive and they have memory from other generations, a connectivity to other generations. But in terms of the future, it's hard to kind of to know and predict a future about what people should be doing or might want to do.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you're not that you're asking that, but I do think that there are aspects from at least my time or things that I remember from previous times that there are still areas, plenty of new pathways, even from now and the past, to be pursued. I am also one of those people. Maybe that's sounds quite hard to say, but I think it's a reason. I'm not that old, by the way, but considering all things, I think there's a reason why I'm here is because I feel that what I've been doing, even though I know it's progressive, but it's been a slow burn, a slow progressive. I feel that there's plenty of things, whether they're affected me or other things, I'm gradually seeing noses pop out. So I'm hearing so many different versions about what it means to be stolen, what it means to be a descendant of stolen, that, sometimes it was good and comforting, sometimes it's just a feeling of loss. Sometimes these situations have resulted in heinous abuse of people. Even that idea of country, what's there for people, it's complex. And I think even now we have some strong narratives that seem to be, even in our microcosmic worlds, universes seem to be mainstream. But I think at these intersections, or perhaps we're intersections of queerness and indigeneity meet, there are plenty more stories. Hopefully stories of joy and happiness, I'm sure there are, and nuances. I mean, I suppose even, some of the music I'm celebrating is at those perhaps joyful intersections. Even controversial figures like Kevin Bloody Wilson, dare I say it, even though there were heinous representations at the time, for some of us, well, it was a representation.
They exist.
And and some of us had fun with it. You know, maybe we just laughed at it because it was so hideous that we kind of thought it was funny.
That's still a thing.
Know?
Yeah.
But, yeah, I think some of those, there's probably some other really quite dark things that I know maybe a lot of us would be experiencing. But, you know, gradually seeing aspects of that coming out, like some other, you know, other forms of abuse and situations that happen. But, yeah, in a way I would suggest easy does it.
Yeah.
In a way, because, you know, you are valued as well, you know, so keep moving forward, but be careful and make sure you've got support around you, because it might seem that not everybody's going to be waving the flag for you around these things, you know, they're because they trigger other people too, and people don't know how to deal with it. I think that's kind of my point in a way when I said, you know, when I look at this saboteur and I think, okay, what can you do for me? That necessarily isn't going to work for you. And by you, I don't mean you specifically. I mean,
no.
Because these are individual things.
Yeah.
You know, I think there's a lot to do with in the future, but I think, you know, we're going to need support, and we're going to need to keep that village going. And sometimes we need a lot of support when it feels like that a whole lot of us have our own community sometimes might seem like they're going to be against us because it's a bit too difficult for them to swallow or to look at.
Yeah.
Oh, the pain of others. There we go. And of the self. It's very deep now. That's who wrote the regarding the pain of others? Oh, she also did photography. Anyway, it's all right. I'll get to it.
It's Sontag, of course. Yeah.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, that's what I thought photography.
That's so powerful. I think unless you've got anything to add, I need to go and have a lie down. No,
I don't. Well, I think that's where it's at. I don't know where to say it. I mean, sometimes, you know, we know this stuff because we've, you know, whether it's full disclosure or not, you know, that these things are tricky, and, you know, it goes back to that in a way that, you know, yep, you're completely alone. Sorry, love. Well, sorry, mate, you're completely alone, but you're also not. But it's hard to know who your allies are going to be. And this stuff's, it's personal, it's relatable, but it doesn't mean that you need to be silent about it either. It's finding that sweet spot. And sometimes you need the right village around you to enable that sweet spot to occur. You can't do it by yourself.
Yeah. I think that's right. I think sometimes the word bravery is really overstated, because I think there's an evaluation that happens quite often for people, but also sometimes it is bravery.
It is. I like to. I have this play with in terms of resilience. I know I've said it. I've written it down, so it exists. I authored it, so it's okay if I say it here now. Sometimes I think even that idea of resistance or resilience it's lovely because it makes people feel valued, and of course we're all doing resistance and resilience. But again, it's not a competition. But
that's right.
But occasionally I think, you wouldn't know resilience if it sat on your face.
Yeah.
And that's a really funny image. But
What would it look like if it sat on your face?
I've had some of their aunties in particular in stitches over that one because I was literal, you know, cackling. It's great. So I'm very proud of myself there. I love that saying. But, you know, they wouldn't know resilience if it sat on their face, because, of course, it plays on this quite a horrible, sexually cringy thing a bloke would often say about a woman, you know.
I guess it's true, but it's sort of what's funny. It's also funny just because resilience is trotted out so often as the aspiration, as though it's not pretty much something that you get when you don't have a choice, you know.
Yes.
But it's like, this is a tool that you can develop. It's actually not a tool that you can develop, sorry. No. You know, and so much of it is about what we endure and how we remain, you know.
Yes.
And
I suppose as creative people, we have resilience in our pudding.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, proof's in the pudding. And, you know, we actually don't only respond to culture, we create it.
Yeah, which is, amazing. And probably a great way to end, unless you've got anything else that you'd like.
I'm done. But not done.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was incredible.
It's not like a therapy session in a way. I hope you'll see it that way too. And it almost needs one of those, it's really not like one of those lines on the bottom, if this is creating some sort of trauma for you, call someone that cares.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. Exactly. There's no content warnings for any of this, sorry. All the content, please, all the warnings.
But we care. But,
yeah.
To tell someone that cares. Again, that self-deprecating humour.
Yeah, it's warning, we're talking about art and we're queer Indigenous people. So that's the warning you're getting.
Okay.
All stuff included. You've been listening to Troy-Anthony Baylis, Sandy O'Sullivan and Han Reardon-Smith on the Queer As podcast. Queer As is part of the Saving Lives research program that recalls and centres the power of queer Indigenous artistic thinking and creativity. This anti-colonial podcast is sponsored by the Australian Research Council and in partnership with Indigenous X and the Centre for Global Indigenous Futures. To find out more about Troy-Anthony's work, please go to the Queer As website. That's queer-as.org, where you'll find links to their work and the work of other artists and Black academics with a Q and Indigiqueers with a capital Queer.